3 rings. That was all it took to turn the silent, velvet-draped dining room of Il Cigno Nero into a death trap. In the world of Lorenzo Moretti, the most feared capo in New York, silence is currency, and an interruption is usually a death sentence. But when the trembling waitress pulled a cracked burner phone from her apron and answered, not in English, but in a flawlessly terrified Neapolitan dialect, the air didn't just shift. It froze. She thought she was whispering a desperate plea to a ghost from her past. She didn't know she was auditioning for the role of a lifetime, or perhaps the end of her life. Because Lorenzo Moretti doesn't believe in coincidences, and he definitely doesn't believe in innocence. The instructions were simple. Pour the wine with the right hand, clear the plates with the left, and never, under any circumstances, make eye contact with table 4. Eleonora Vance adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform, her knuckles white as she gripped the silver tray. She was 24, living in a studio apartment in Queens that smelled of boiled cabbage and wet drywall, and she was currently invisible. That was her superpower. She was the ghost in the machine of New York's high-end dining scene, efficient, silent, and forgettable. Or at least, she tried to be. Tonight, the air in Il Cigno Nero was heavy, suffocatingly thick with the scent of truffle oil and expensive cologne. It was raining outside, a brutal November downpour that lashed against the dark windows, but inside, the storm was entirely man-made. At table 4 sat 4 men. 3 of them were large, boisterous, wearing suits that cost more than Eleonora's entire education. But the fourth man was silence personified, Lorenzo Moretti. Even the kitchen staff whispered his name like a curse. He wasn't merely a mob boss, he was an institution. At 32, he had consolidated the 5 families' shipping routes and silenced the Russian expansion in Brooklyn without firing a single shot, or so the rumors went. He sat with his back to the wall, nursing a glass of Barolo that he hadn't touched in 20 minutes. His eyes, dark as obsidian, scanned the room with the predatory detachment of a wolf watching a herd of deer. Eleonora approached the table, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Just refill the water. Don't look at him. More bread, one of the larger men grunted, a man named Marco, whose neck seemed to have swallowed his chin. He didn't look up. Of course, sir, Eleonora whispered, her voice barely audible. She reached across the table to retrieve the empty basket. As she did, the burner phone hidden deep in the pocket of her apron buzzed. It wasn't supposed to be there. Staff were strictly forbidden from carrying phones on the floor, but Eleonora couldn't leave it in her locker. Not today. Not when her grandmother, Nonna Rosa, was in the hospital back in Naples, her condition critical. The doctors had promised to call if things took a turn. She froze. The buzz against her hip felt like a gunshot. She pulled back, hoping the ambient jazz music masked the vibration. But Lorenzo Moretti's head tilted, just a fraction of an inch. He had heard it. Eleonora retreated to the service station, her hands shaking. She needed to check it. She had to. She ducked behind the heavy velvet curtain, separating the dining floor from the kitchen corridor. It was a blind spot, or so she thought. She pulled the phone out. Unknown number. Country code +39. Italy. Her breath hitched. She shouldn't answer. If the floor manager Giuseppe saw her, she'd be fired on the spot. But if this was the doctor, if Nonna was gone... She pressed answer, pressing the phone hard against her ear, hunching her shoulders to hide. Pronto? She whispered. Eleonora. A grave. Devi ascoltarmi. Eleonora? It's serious. You need to listen to me. It wasn't the doctor. The voice was raspy, desperate. It was her uncle Dario, a man she hadn't spoken to in 6 years, a man who was supposed to be in prison. "Zio!" Eleonora hissed, her voice slipping automatically into the sharp, clipped dialect of the Neapolitan back streets, a language she had spent 6 years trying to scrub from her tongue. "Che succede? Perché chiami? What is happening? Why are you calling?" "They found us," Dario said, his voice cracking. "The debt is not paid. They know you are in New York. You need to run." Eleonora's blood turned to ice. No, I left that behind. I paid my share. I am nobody here." "You are never nobody to them, Eleonora. Run. Now." The line went dead. Eleonora stood there, the phone slipping from her numb fingers. The kitchen noise, the clatter of pans, the shouting of chefs, faded into a dull roar. They found her. The past she had fled, the debts of a father she despised, had crossed the Atlantic. She turned around, desperate to run to the locker room, to grab her coat and disappear into the rain. But she didn't run into the locker room. She ran straight into a wall of solid muscle. She gasped, stumbling back. Standing in the corridor, blocking her path, was Marco. And behind him, leaning casually against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets, was Lorenzo Moretti. Lorenzo wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the phone in her hand. "That wasn't English," Lorenzo said. His voice was low, smooth, and terrified her more than Marco's bulk. And it wasn't the Italian they teach in tourists' guidebooks. Eleonora swallowed, her throat dry as sand. I apologize, sir. Family emergency. I'll leave immediately." "Naples?" Lorenzo observed, taking a slow step toward her. The kitchen staff had vanished. The corridor was suddenly, terrifyingly empty. Specifically the quartieri spagnoli, the dialect of the slums. He stopped a foot away from her. He smelled of rain and expensive tobacco. "Who are you?" he asked. "Just a waitress." Eleonora lied, her voice trembling. "Eleonora. Just Eleonora." Lorenzo studied her face. He looked at her not like a woman, but like a cipher he was trying to crack. He reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric of her apron, and plucked the phone from her hand. "A waitress with a burner phone," he mused, looking at the cracked screen. "Speaking the dialect of the Camorra in my restaurant, while my shipment from Naples is currently sitting in customs, held up by an anonymous tip." Eleonora's eyes went wide. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please give me my phone." Lorenzo's eyes snapped to hers. The playfulness vanished. "You answered a call. You looked terrified. And now you want to run." He turned to Marco. "Bring her to the office." "No." Eleonora stepped back, but Marco's hand clamped onto her upper arm like a vice. "I have to go. I quit." Lorenzo turned his back on her, walking toward the private office at the back of the restaurant. He didn't look back. He simply spoke into the air, 5 words that sealed her fate. "Don't let her leave, Marco." The office smelled of old leather and stale fear. It was a windowless room, dominated by a mahogany desk that looked heavy enough to crush a man. Eleonora sat in a wooden chair in the center of the room, her hands gripping her knees. Marco stood by the door, arms crossed, a silent sentinel. Lorenzo was behind the desk, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't hit her. That was what made it worse. "Drink," Lorenzo said, sliding a glass across the desk toward her. "I don't drink," Eleonora said, her voice shaking. "It's brandy. It helps with the shock." He took a sip of his own, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You're shaking, Eleonora. Is it because you're guilty, or because you think I'm going to hurt you?" "I think you're a criminal," she blurted out, then immediately bit her lip. "Stupid. Stupid. Lorenzo chuckled darkly. A rare, genuine sound. Honesty, I like that. Yes, I am a criminal, but I am an orderly one. I dislike chaos, and tonight, you are chaos. He leaned forward, the light from the desk lamp casting sharp shadows across his angular face. Let's start again. You speak the dialect. You clearly grew up in the life. You're working in my territory, in my headquarters, pretending to be a nobody. Why? I told you, Eleonora said, fighting to keep her voice steady. I have family there. My uncle called. He's sick. Liar, Lorenzo said softly. He didn't raise his voice. He just stated it as a fact. He picked up her phone, which lay on the desk between them. I traced the number while Marco brought you back here. It's a deadline now, of course. But the prefix. It belongs to a sector controlled by the Vieri family. Eleonora went rigid. The Vieri family. The rivals of her father. The men who had hunted her family into extinction. The Vieris are my enemies, Eleonora, Lorenzo said, his voice dropping an octave. Did they send you here? Are you a spy? A plant? Did they think a pretty face would distract me while they raided my docks? No. The denial was torn from her throat. I hate the Vieris. They killed my father. The room went silent. Lorenzo's expression shifted. The aggression dialed back, replaced by a sharp, intense curiosity. They killed your father. Eleonora looked down at her hands. She had said too much, but she had no choice. If he thought she was with the Vieri, he would kill her tonight. 6 years ago, she whispered. My father was a bookkeeper, a small man. He made a mistake with the Vieri's money. They came for him. I ran. I came here, changed my name, took this job. I just wanted to disappear. Lorenzo watched her for a long time. He was looking for the tick, the tell, the lie, but he found only raw, unadulterated fear. He stood up and walked around the desk. Eleonora flinched, pressing herself back into the chair. Lorenzo stopped beside her. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. If the Vieri killed your father, Lorenzo murmured, then why did someone from their sector call you tonight? It was my uncle, Eleonora said, tears stinging her eyes. He's in hiding too. He called to warn me. He said they found us. He said I have to run. Lorenzo straightened up. He looked at Marco, then back at Eleonora. He seemed to be weighing something heavy in his mind. They found you, he repeated. Yes. So please, just let me go. I'll leave the city. You'll never see me again. Lorenzo walked to the door. He placed a hand on the knob, then stopped. If the Vieri know you are here, they know you are at Il Cigno Nero, Lorenzo said calmly. If you walk out that door, you will be dead within the hour. They will snatch you off the street. That's my problem, Eleonora said, standing up. Not yours. Lorenzo turned back to her. A strange look crossed his face. Possessiveness? Calculation? Wrong, he said. You are my employee. You were threatened under my roof. And if the Vieri are hunting you, then you have information they want. Or you are leverage. He walked back to her, invading her space until she was forced to look up at him. You aren't leaving, Eleonora. You can't keep me here. I can do whatever I want, Lorenzo said, his voice hard as iron. You want to survive the night? You stay with me. And if I refuse? Lorenzo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Marco will lock the door, and you will stay anyway, but it will be much less comfortable. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm, his touch startlingly gentle for a man who ordered deaths for a living. Besides, Lorenzo whispered, I think you might be the key to destroying the Vieri family once and for all. and I never throw away a key. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the front of the restaurant. Glass shattering, screams. Marco whipped out a gun from his jacket. "Boss, out front!" Lorenzo didn't flinch. He grabbed Eleonora's wrist. "It seems," he said, pulling her toward a hidden panel in the wall behind the bookshelf, "that your friends have arrived early." The world compressed into darkness and the smell of damp concrete. Lorenzo moved with the terrifying certainty of a large cat in the dark, his grip on Eleonora's wrist unyielding. Behind them, muffled through feet of stone and earth, the sounds of chaos at Il Cigno Nero faded, the shouts, the sickening crunch of violence. "Keep up," Lorenzo barked, his voice echoing strangely in the narrow tunnel. "Where are we going?" Eleonora gasped, stumbling over uneven ground. The air was cold here, thin and metallic. Somewhere the Vieri rats won't think to look for at least 24 hours. They emerged minutes later into the subterranean garage of an adjacent skyscraper. A sleek, charcoal-grey Audi sedan was waiting, its engine already humming. Marco was somehow already in the driver's seat, his suit jacket dusted with plaster. Lorenzo shoved Eleonora into the back seat and slid in beside her. "Drive. The Riverside penthouse." The car tore out of the garage, merging aggressively into the rain-slicked Manhattan traffic. Eleonora pressed herself against the door, shivering violently. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving behind a sickening dread. She looked at Lorenzo. In the strobing streetlights, his profile was hard as granite. He was on his phone, speaking rapidly in low, lethal Italian. She caught phrases. "Clean the mess. Find out how they knew. Nobody leaves the restaurant alive if they aren't ours." He hung up and turned to her. The intensity of his gaze made her flinch. "You are a very expensive waitress, Eleonora," he said coldly. "4 of my men are injured. My flagship restaurant is a crime scene, all because you couldn't leave a phone call unanswered." "I didn't ask for your help," she retorted, though her voice lacked force. "I told you to let me go. If I had let you go out that front door, you'd be in the trunk of a Vieri car right now, on your way to a New Jersey landfill. They weren't there for dinner. They were there for a snatch and grab." He leaned closer. His presence filled the car. "They want you badly. Why?" "I told you. My father—" "Your father was a small-time bookkeeper," Lorenzo interrupted, his voice dripping with skepticism. "The Vieri don't send a hit squad for the daughter of a dead accountant 6 years later over petty cash." "You're lying." Before she could defend herself, the car swerved into a private underground entrance of a glass residential tower overlooking the Hudson River. The elevator ride was silent and swift, depositing them directly into a penthouse that spanned the entire top floor. It was cavernous, decorated in severe minimalism: chrome, glass, bleached wood. It was beautiful, cold, and utterly impersonal. "Marco will stay downstairs in the lobby," Lorenzo said, tossing his suit jacket onto a leather sofa. He revealed a shoulder holster carrying a sleek Beretta. He didn't bother to remove it. "There is a guard at the service entrance. You are 20 stories up. The windows are reinforced. Do not try to leave." Eleonora stood in the middle of the vast living room, feeling absurd in her cheap, rain-soaked waitress uniform against the backdrop of multi-million-dollar luxury. "What is this place?" she whispered. "A safe house. One of many." He walked to a stunningly stocked bar and poured another brandy. He didn't offer her one this time. "There's clothes in the guest room closet. Shower, change, burn that uniform. You smell like fear and cheap truffle oil." "And then what?" Lorenzo took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes raking over her form, assessing her not with lust, but with a chilling calculation of her value. Then, tesoro, he said softly, we sit down, and you tell me the real truth, because if I find out you're playing me, I won't need the Vieri. I'll throw you off this balcony myself. He turned his back on her, staring out at the rain-streaked skyline of the city he claimed to own. Eleonora realized with a jolt of terror that she had simply traded one cage for another. This one was just gilded. The shower didn't wash away the fear, but it stopped the shaking. Eleonora found a silk robe in the guest closet that felt like water against her skin, a stark contrast to the scratchy polyester she was used to. She wrapped it tightly around herself, armor made of gossamer. When she emerged into the cavernous living room, the penthouse was dark save for the city lights bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Lorenzo was sitting in an armchair facing the view, a tablet glowing in his lap. He didn't turn around when she approached. Sit. She sat on the edge of the opposing sofa. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Your name isn't Eleonora Vance, Lorenzo said suddenly. He swiped a finger across the tablet. It's Eleonora Giordano, daughter of Paolo Giordano. Eleonora felt the blood drain from her face. How did you? I'm Lorenzo Moretti. Knowing things is my business. I had my people run your prints from the glass you touched in my office. He finally turned to look at her. The shadows made his eyes look like endless pits. You did a good job disappearing. Fake passport, cash jobs, staying off the grid. Very professional for a 24-year-old. I had to survive. Indeed. He stood up and walked toward the window, his silhouette imposing against the city lights. But here is where your story breaks down, Eleonora. I looked into Paolo Giordano. Yes, he was a bookkeeper for the Vieri. Yes, he was murdered 6 years ago because funds went missing. He turned sharply, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. But he wasn't just skimming off the top. He stole something else, something the Vieri family values more than money. Eleonora was genuinely confused. I don't know what you're talking about. We had nothing. When we ran, we left with 2 suitcases of clothes. Lorenzo studied her. He was excellent at reading people, at sensing the microscopic tremors of deceit. But looking at the woman curled on his sofa, looking small and devastatingly vulnerable in the oversized robe, he saw only confusion. Don't lie to me, he warned, but there was less heat in it this time. He walked closer, standing over her. The Vieri sent a cleaner team tonight. That's high level. They believe you have it. Have what? Eleonora cried, frustration warring with fear. My father left me nothing but debt and nightmares. The Red Ledger, Lorenzo said. The words hung in the air. Eleonora shook her head slowly. I've never heard of it. Lorenzo crouched down so they were eye level. The proximity was overwhelming. She could see the faint stubble on his jaw, feel the heat radiating from him. The Vieri family has decades of bribes, hits, and political payoffs recorded. They don't use computers for the important stuff. Too hackable. They use a physical book, the Red Ledger. 6 years ago, it vanished the same week your father did. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, before he seemed to think better of it, and pulled back. If the Vieri think you have that book, Eleonora, they will peel your skin off inch by inch to get it. That ledger could put their entire hierarchy in prison for life. It could start a war that burns down half the eastern seaboard. Eleonora felt sick. But I don't have it, I swear. I didn't even know it existed. Lorenzo stared into her eyes, searching for the lie. For a long, agonizing moment, he said nothing. He was a man who trusted no one, a man who survived by assuming the worst in everyone. Yet, looking at the raw terror in her wide, doe-like eyes, Something in his cynical armor cracked. She wasn't a player. She was a pawn who didn't even know she was on the board. A strange sensation washed over Lorenzo. It was protective, possessive, and deeply inconvenient. He hated it. He stood abruptly, needing distance. Then they are misinformed. Or your father was smarter than everyone gave him credit for and hid it somewhere only you could find, without you even knowing it. He paced the room, his mind working furiously. The dynamic had shifted. She wasn't just a nuisance or potential leverage anymore. If the Vieri thought she had the ledger, that was almost as good as her actually having it. He stopped pacing and looked at her. It doesn't matter if you have it or not. The only thing that matters is what they believe. A cruel, calculating smile spread across his handsome face, transforming him back into the predator she feared. We're going to change the narrative, Eleonora. You want to stop running? Good, because you're done hiding in the shadows. Eleonora looked up at him, dread pooling in her stomach. What are you going to do? Lorenzo walked over to her, reaching down to grip her chin gently but firmly, forcing her to look at him. The air crackled between them, a mix of threat and an undeniable, burgeoning sexual tension that neither dared to acknowledge. We are going to make them come for you, Lorenzo whispered, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. But this time, you won't be a helpless waitress waiting to be snatched in the dark. You're going to be mine, and when they come for what's mine, I'll be waiting to slaughter them. He let go of her chin and stepped back. Get some sleep, Eleonora Giordano. Tomorrow, you stop being a ghost. Tomorrow, you become the most famous woman in the New York underworld. Morning arrived not with sunlight, but with the sharp click of heels on marble. Eleonora woke with a start, disoriented in the enormous bed that felt like an island in a sea of silk sheets. Standing at the foot of the bed was a severe-looking woman in a charcoal suit, holding a garment bag like a weapon. Mr. Moretti expects you ready in 2 hours, the woman said, her voice devoid of warmth. I am Anya. I am here to make sure you look like you belong to him, and not to a diner kitchen. Eleonora sat up, clutching the duvet. Where is he? Working. He doesn't have the luxury of sleeping in. Anya snapped her fingers, and a team of 3 assistants flowed into the room carrying boxes, makeup cases, and shoes that looked like torture devices. The next 2 hours were a blur of invasive grooming. Eleonora was scrubbed, polished, and painted. Her wild curls were tamed into a sleek, dark cascade that fell down her back like spilled ink. Her nails were painted a deep, oxblood red. Then came the dress. It was emerald green silk, backless, with a slit that ran dangerously high up her thigh. It was a dress designed to cause accidents. It fit her like a second skin, leaving absolutely nothing to the imagination while hiding everything. Beautiful! A deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Eleonora spun around. Lorenzo was leaning against the doorframe, dressed in a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders so perfectly it had to be bespoke. He looked devastating, dangerous, a prince of the city's dark underbelly. He walked into the room, waving the stylists away. They vanished instantly, leaving the 2 of them alone in the charged silence. Lorenzo circled her slowly, his eyes dark and unreadable. He stopped behind her, his gaze locking with hers in the vanity mirror. You clean up well, Eleonora, he murmured. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a diamond necklace. It was heavy, ostentatious, and cold against her skin as he fastened it around her neck. This is not a gift. It is a collar. It tells everyone in the room that you are under the protection of the Moretti family. Where are we going? Eleonora asked, touching the cold stones. She felt like a doll, a very expensive, breakable doll. The Russo Gala, Lorenzo said, his hands lingering on her shoulders. Neutral ground. All the 5 families will be there, including the Vieri. Eleonora's breath hitched. You're taking me straight to them? I am taking you to the lion's den, Lorenzo corrected, his voice low and silky near her ear. But you are walking in on the arm of the lion Tamer. Tonight, you are not the scared girl from the kitchen. You are my mistress, my obsession, the woman I value above all else. He turned her around to face him. His expression was hard, serious. Listen to me closely, Eleonora. They will be watching everything. How you look at me, how you touch me. If they sense fear, they will attack. If they sense weakness, we are both dead. You have to sell it. I don't know how to be a mafia mistress, she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. Lorenzo caught her hands in his. His grip was warm, grounding. You don't have to know. You just have to look at me like I'm the only man in the room. Can you do that? Eleonora looked up at him. At the sharp line of his jaw, the cruel curve of his mouth, the darkness in his eyes that promised violence to the world but, strangely, safety to her. It wasn't hard to pretend he was captivating. He was the most magnetic force she had ever encountered. I can do it, she said softly. Good. Lorenzo leaned down, brushing his lips against her temple. It was a performance, she knew. Practice, but a shiver raced down her spine all the same. Then let's go start a war. The Russo Gala was held in a sprawling ballroom in Midtown, dripping with crystal chandeliers and malice. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and hypocrisy. Men who ordered hits on each other's brothers clinked champagne glasses and laughed about golf scores. When Lorenzo and Eleonora walked in, the room didn't just go quiet, the atmosphere physically shifted. Heads turned, whispers hissed like steam escaping a valve. Moretti? Who is she? Is that the girl? The one from the rumors? Lorenzo's hand was a warm weight on the small of her back, guiding her, claiming her. He held her close, his body a shield against the room. Chin up, he whispered against her hair, smiling for the crowd while his eyes scanned for threats. Look bored. You are above them. Eleonora channeled every ounce of her grandmother's haughty Neapolitan pride. She lifted her chin, her eyes sweeping over the crowd with feigned indifference. She felt the weight of 100 stares, some lustful, some jealous, all calculating. Lorenzo, a voice boomed. A short, balding man with a smile like a shark waddled over. It was Don Russo, the host. You grace us with your presence, Russo said, his eyes immediately sliding to Eleonora. And you've brought company. Eleonora, Lorenzo said, his voice possessive. My companion. He didn't introduce her last name. He didn't need to. The mystery was the weapon. Charmed, Russo said, reaching for her hand to kiss it. His lips were wet. Eleonora suppressed a shudder. Don Russo, she said, her voice steady. Lorenzo has told me so little about you. He prefers to keep business quiet. Lorenzo's lips twitched with amusement. She was good. They moved through the room, a shark moving through a reef. Lorenzo introduced her to key players, always keeping her tucked into his side. His touch was constant, a hand on her waist, fingers brushing her arm, a whisper in her ear. To the outside world, they were consumed by each other. But Eleonora noticed the way Lorenzo's muscles were coiled tight as steel wire. He was waiting. And then she saw them. At a table near the balcony, 3 men were watching them. They didn't have drinks. They didn't smile. The man in the center was older, with silver hair and a scar running through his left eyebrow. Salvatore Vieri, the man who ordered her father's death. Eleonora froze. The memory of that night, the shouting, the gunshots, her father shoving her out the back window, came rushing back. Lorenzo felt her stiffen. He didn't look at the Vieri table. He looked at her, his expression softening into a mask of lover's concern. "Don't look at them," he murmured, caressing her cheek with his thumb. "Look at me. Only me." "That's him," she breathed, her eyes wide. "Salvatore." "I know," Lorenzo said. "He's confused. He's wondering why the girl he's hunting is wearing diamonds around my neck. He's wondering if I know about the ledger. He looks like he wants to kill me right here." "He won't. Not in front of the other families. It's against the code." Lorenzo leaned in, his lips brushing hers in a chaste, taunting kiss intended for Salvatore's audience. "Smile, tesoro. You're winning." Eleonora forced a smile, but her heart was hammering. The game was escalating. Suddenly, Salvatore stood up. He didn't come over. He simply raised his glass to Lorenzo, a gesture that was half toast, half threat. Then he turned and walked toward the terrace doors. Lorenzo's eyes narrowed. "Stay here," he ordered Eleonora. "Do not move from this spot. Marco is 5 feet to your left." "Where are you going?" "To see what the old wolf wants." Lorenzo walked away, leaving Eleonora standing alone in the sea of sharks. She felt exposed despite the heavy necklace. Minutes ticked by. She sipped champagne she didn't want. She deflected a drunk underboss who tried to buy her a drink. Then a waiter bumped into her. "Scusi, signorina," the young man muttered, steadying her. As he pulled away, he pressed something into her hand. A folded napkin. Eleonora looked down. Scrawled in shaky ink were 3 words. "Kitchen. Now." Dario, her uncle. Her heart leapt into her throat. He was here, in the kitchen. He must have tried to find her. If the Vieri found him first. She looked for Marco. He was distracted, arguing with security near the entrance. Lorenzo was still on the terrace. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was reckless. But it was her family. The only family she had left. Eleonora set her glass down and slipped through the crowd toward the service doors. The kitchen of the hotel was a chaotic labyrinth of stainless steel and steam, much louder and larger than Il Cigno Nero. Eleonora navigated through the shouting chefs, dodging waiters carrying towering trays of hors d'oeuvres. "Dario," she whispered, clutching the napkin. She reached the back loading dock, a quiet, cooler area where the smokers usually gathered. It was empty. "Zio?" The heavy steel door behind her clicked shut. The lock turned with a finality that made her blood run cold. Eleonora spun around. It wasn't her uncle. Leaning against the door, tossing a small switchblade between his hands, was a man she didn't recognize. He was young, handsome in a cruel way, with the Vieri crest pin on his lapel. "Uncle Dario couldn't make it," the man smiled. "He's indisposed, but he sends his regards." It was a trap, a stupid, obvious trap, and she had walked right into it. "Where is he?" Eleonora demanded, backing away until her spine hit the cold concrete wall. "Dead, probably. Or singing to the feds. Who cares?" The man stepped forward. "I'm Enzo, Salvatore's nephew, and you, Eleonora, are a very difficult woman to find." "Lorenzo knows I'm here," she bluffed, her voice shaking. "He's on his way." "Lorenzo is busy measuring dicks with my uncle on the terrace. He won't hear you scream over the jazz band." Enzo lunged. Eleonora didn't think. She reacted. Years of dodging, grasping hands in dive bars and carrying heavy trays had made her quick. She ducked under his arm, grabbing a heavy cast-iron skillet from a drying rack as she moved. As Enzo turned, sneering, she swung the skillet with every ounce of terrifying adrenaline she possessed. Clang! It connected with the side of his head with a sickening thud. Enzo stumbled back, dazed, blood trickling from his temple. He wasn't unconscious, though. He roared in anger, pulling a gun from his waistband. Eleonora scrambled back, throwing a rack of metal mixing bowls into his path. They clattered loudly, creating a cacophony of noise. "Bitch!" Enzo raised the gun. The service door exploded inward. It didn't open. It was kicked off its hinges. Lorenzo Moretti stood in the frame, and he looked like the wrath of God. His tuxedo was unbuttoned, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Enzo spun around, raising his gun toward Lorenzo. He was too slow. 2 shots rang out. Bang! Bang! Enzo dropped to the floor, screaming, clutching his kneecaps. Lorenzo had shattered both of them. Lorenzo didn't even look at the screaming man. He strode across the room to Eleonora, who was sliding down the wall in shock. He hauled her up, his hands frantically checking her for injuries. "Did he touch you?" Lorenzo demanded, his voice ragged. "Eleonora, look at me. Did he touch you?" "No," she gasped, trembling so hard her teeth chattered. I hit him with a pan." Lorenzo looked at the cast-iron skillet on the floor, then at the groaning hitman. A flicker of something like pride, dark and fierce, crossed his face. He turned to Enzo, who was writhing in a pool of blood. Lorenzo walked over and placed a polished dress shoe on the man's shattered knee. Enzo shrieked. "You tell Salvatore," Lorenzo said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "that he just broke the truce. And tell him that if he ever sends a boy to do a man's job near my wife again, I will burn his house down with him inside it." Wife. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Lorenzo grabbed Eleonora's hand. "We're leaving. Now." He dragged her out the back exit, into the alley where his car was already waiting, engine idling. He shoved her into the back seat and climbed in after her. "Drive," he barked at the driver. As the car sped away, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving Eleonora crashing into shock. She started to cry, silent, shaking sobs. Lorenzo pulled her into him. It wasn't gentle this time. It was desperate. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in her scent, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands. "I told you to stay put," he growled against her skin, but his hand was stroking her hair soothingly. "I told you not to move." The note, it said my uncle. It was a lie, Eleonora. In this world, everything is a lie. He pulled back to look at her. His eyes were wild. "I almost lost you. Do you understand? I was 10 seconds too late." "You came for me," she whispered. "Of course I came for you." He looked at her lips. The tension in the car spiked, hotter than the violence in the kitchen. The line between fake and real had been obliterated by the gunshot. Lorenzo kissed her. It wasn't a performance for a crowd. It was hard, possessive, and hungry. It tasted of brandy and danger. Eleonora melted into him, clutching his lapels, needing the contact to prove she was still alive. When he pulled away, both of them were breathless. Lorenzo rested his forehead against hers. "We are at war now," he said roughly. "No more games. We go to the safe house in the Hamptons. We dig in." "Lorenzo," Eleonora said, a sudden memory surfacing through the haze of shock. "Enzo, before you came in, he said something." "What?" He said I was hard to find. But then he said, Uncle Dario couldn't make it. He knew my uncle's name. I never told anyone my uncle's name. Not even you." Lorenzo froze. "Are you sure?" "Yes. And when I was a kid, my father used to sing me a lullaby about a little bird hiding in a clock tower." She looked at Lorenzo, her eyes wide. "My Uncle Dario, he was a clockmaker. He had a shop in Naples, the Orologio. It was filled with old grandfather clocks." Lorenzo's eyes widened. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "The ledger," he whispered. "It's not a book, it's inside a clock." "And I think," Eleonora said, her voice trembling, "I think I know which one. My father sent a crate to New York a week before he died. He told me it was just old junk for an antique dealer. But the dealer never picked it up. It's in a storage unit in Queens. I've been paying the rent on it for 6 years." Lorenzo looked at her with a mix of awe and grim determination. "Then we aren't going to the Hamptons," he said, turning to the driver. "Turn around. We're going to Queens." "If we get that ledger," Lorenzo said, looking back at her, "we don't just survive. We win. We end the Vieri family tonight." He took her hand and kissed the knuckles, right where they were bruised from gripping the skillet. "Are you ready to finish this, Eleonora?" She looked at the man who had kidnapped her, saved her, and just kissed her like he wanted to devour her soul. She realized with a start that she wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was afraid for him. "Yes," she said. "Let's go get it." The rain in Queens fell harder than it did in Manhattan. It was gritty, industrial rain that smelled of wet asphalt and rust. The You Store It facility was a graveyard of abandoned dreams, rows of corrugated metal doors hiding old furniture, forgotten toys, and in Unit 402, a ghost. Marco cut the padlock with bolt cutters. The sound cracked through the silent alley like a gunshot. He rolled the metal door up, the rusted tracks screaming in protest. Inside, under the harsh beam of Lorenzo's flashlight, dust motes danced in the stale air. It was piled high with boxes, but in the back, draped in a heavy canvas sheet, stood a towering shape. Eleonora stepped over a box of old winter coats. Her hands were trembling, but not from cold. She pulled the canvas down. There it was, an 18th century Neapolitan grandfather clock, walnut wood, hand-carved with cherubs and vines. It was ugly, ornate, and the most beautiful thing Eleonora had ever seen. "The pendulum," Eleonora whispered. She opened the glass door of the clock face. "My father said the bird hides when the sun goes down." She looked at the clock face. It was frozen at 3:00. "Sunset," Lorenzo murmured, standing close behind her, his gun drawn and pointed at the open garage door. "Set it to sunset." Eleonora pushed the heavy minute hand. She spun it around. The gears groaned, stiff from 6 years of silence. She moved the hour hand to 7:04, then 7:30, finally 8:00. Click. A sharp mechanical sound echoed from the belly of the clock. The wooden panel behind the pendulum didn't just open, it slid aside, revealing a false back. Nestled inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was a thick, leather-bound book. The Red Ledger. Eleonora reached in and pulled it out. It was heavy. She opened it. The pages were filled with her father's neat, cramped handwriting. Names, dates, bank account numbers in the Cayman Islands, judges' names, police captains. It was the anatomy of the Vieri crime family, laid bare. "We have it," Eleonora breathed, turning to Lorenzo. "Lorenzo, we—" Crunch. The sound of tires on gravel outside cut her off. Lorenzo killed the flashlight instantly. "Get down." Behind the clock. Headlights flooded the storage unit, blindingly bright, casting long, distorted shadows against the back wall. 2 black SUVs blocked the alley exit. Doors slammed. "I know you're in there, Lorenzo." The voice was gravel and smoke. Salvatore Vieri. "You really thought," Salvatore shouted, his voice echoing off the metal units, "that I wouldn't track my own nephew's phone? You left Enzo alive. Amateur mistake." Lorenzo crouched behind a stack of crates near the entrance, signaling Marco to take the left flank. He looked back at Eleonora, who was huddled behind the grandfather clock, clutching the ledger to her chest. "When I start shooting," Lorenzo whispered to her, his voice steady as a heartbeat. "You stay down. No matter what." Lorenzo, I love you, he said. It was the first time he had said it. It sounded like a goodbye. He turned back to the light. Salvatore, you're trespassing on neutral ground. There is no neutral ground for thieves, Salvatore roared. Give me the girl and the book, and I'll make your death quick. Refuse, and I'll burn this metal box with you inside it. Come and get it, Lorenzo snarled. The night exploded. Bullets shredded the air, sparking against the metal walls. Lorenzo fired back, his shots controlled, lethal. Marco was firing from behind an old sofa. Eleonora covered her ears, curling into a ball as wood chips from the clock rained down on her. The noise was deafening. She heard Marco grunt, a wet, sickening sound, and then silence from his side. Marco! Lorenzo yelled. He was pinned. They were suppressing him with automatic fire. He couldn't move. He couldn't check on Marco, and he was running out of ammo. Eleonora looked at the book in her hands. The object that had killed her father. The object that was about to kill the man she loved. She felt a surge of cold, crystal-clear rage. She was done hiding. She was done being the victim. She saw a lighter on top of a box of old junk, a cheap, yellow Bic lighter. She grabbed it. Stop! Eleonora screamed. Her voice was high and piercing, cutting through the gunfire. She stood up. Eleonora, no! Lorenzo shouted, reaching for her, but he was too far away. Eleonora walked into the center of the unit, directly into the path of the headlights. She held the red ledger high in her left hand and the flickering lighter in her right, the flame dancing inches from the dry, oil-soaked pages. Cease fire! Salvatore screamed. Stop, she's got the book! The shooting stopped instantly. The silence that followed was ringing and heavy. Salvatore Vieri stepped out from behind his car door. He looked old, tired, and terrified. He stared at the flame in Eleonora's hand. You wouldn't dare, Salvatore hissed. That is your father's legacy. My father's legacy is death, Eleonora said, her voice echoing in the alley. This book is just paper, and paper burns. She moved the flame closer. The corner of the oilcloth wrapper curled and blackened. If you shoot him, Eleonora nodded toward Lorenzo. I drop the lighter. The book goes up in flames. And your secrets, the judges, the politicians, the money, it all disappears. You'll have nothing to trade with the feds when they come for you. You'll be nothing. Salvatore hesitated. He was a greedy man, and greed was his weakness. He needed that book to maintain his power. What do you want? Salvatore growled. I want you to leave, Eleonora said. I want you to get in your cars and drive away. If I see tail lights, I leave the book here. You can come back and get it. Eleonora, don't, Lorenzo warned, stepping up beside her, his gun trained on Salvatore's head. It's the only way, she whispered to him. Salvatore weighed his options. If he killed them, the book burned. If he left, he could come back and retrieve it, then hunt them down later. Fine, Salvatore spat. Put the lighter out. We're leaving. He signaled his men. They lowered their weapons and began to back toward the cars. Eleonora didn't lower the lighter. She watched them. Salvatore opened his car door. He looked back at Lorenzo with a sneer. This isn't over, Moretti. You might have the girl, but you've made an enemy for life. You won't have a life to worry about, Lorenzo said softly. Suddenly, sirens wailed in the distance, dozens of them, fast and approaching from both ends of the alley. Salvatore's face went white. You called the cops? No, Lorenzo smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. I called the FBI. I told them I had an anonymous tip about the location of the red ledger and the head of the Vieri family. You rat! Salvatore raised his gun. Bang! Lorenzo didn't hesitate. He shot Salvatore Vieri once, straight through the chest. The Don crumpled to the wet asphalt. The Vieri men panicked, scrambling into their cars, but the alley was already blocked. Blue and red lights flooded the scene. Agents in windbreakers swarmed the lot. "Drop the weapon!" an agent screamed at Lorenzo. Lorenzo dropped his gun. He raised his hands. But he wasn't looking at the FBI. He was looking at Eleonora. She blew out the lighter. As the agents rushed in to cuff them, Lorenzo leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "I'm going to have a very expensive lawyer," he whispered. "I'll be out by morning. They want the book, not me. I'm the informant now." "And what about me?" Eleonora asked, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "You?" Lorenzo smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "You're the woman who just brought down the Vieri Empire with a lighter. You're never leaving my side again." 6 months later. Il Cigno Nero was fully booked for months in advance. The bullet holes in the wall had been plastered over, but the legend remained. Eleonora stood on the balcony of the private office, looking down at the dining room. She wasn't wearing an apron. She was wearing a tailored black suit that cost more than her old apartment. The door opened. Lorenzo walked in. He looked tired but victorious. The RICO case against the Vieri remnants was airtight, thanks to the ledger. The Moretti family was now the undisputed power in New York. "Dinner is served, Signora Moretti," Lorenzo said, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. "I'm not hungry," she said, leaning back into him. "I was just thinking." "About what?" "About that night when I answered the phone." Lorenzo laughed, a low rumble in his chest. He turned her around and kissed her. "I'm glad you did," he said. "If you hadn't, I would have just had a boring dinner. And I would never have met the only person in the world dangerous enough to be my wife." Eleonora smiled, straightening his tie. "You said, 'Don't let her leave.'" "And I meant it," Lorenzo said, pulling her toward the door. "Now come, the world is waiting for us." She took his hand, and this time she didn't look back. And that is the story of Eleonora and Lorenzo, a reminder that sometimes the wrong number can lead to the right destiny. What started as a mistake in a mafia restaurant turned into the fall of an empire and a romance written in gunpowder and blood. It makes you wonder, who is really in charge? The man with the gun, or the woman who knows where the bodies are buried? If you enjoyed this twisty, intense mafia romance saga, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. And tell me in the comments, if you found the red ledger, would you have burned it or used it for blackmail? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.